I had planned to spend 3 quiet days fishing in northern Michigan, far away from meetings, phone calls, and anything that reminded me I still lived in a neighborhood with a homeowners association. By the time I turned my pickup onto my gravel road that Thursday afternoon, I was sunburned, tired, and looking forward to nothing more exciting than unloading my cooler and sitting on my front porch with a cup of coffee. Instead, I slammed on the brakes so hard that my tackle box flew off the passenger seat. Half of my driveway was gone. Fresh dirt stretched across the entrance to my property. Deep saw cuts ran through concrete my father and I had poured together decades earlier. A yellow excavator sat 20 feet from my garage, its bucket resting inside a trench that should never have existed. Orange safety fencing blocked the only way into my own home. For a few seconds, I honestly wondered if I had driven onto the wrong property. Then I saw my mailbox, the old maple tree my mother planted in 1987, and the porch swing hanging exactly where I had left it. This was my house. Someone had simply decided my driveway no longer belonged to me. I stepped out of the truck and looked around. There were no county vehicles, no public works signs, no permit notices posted anywhere near the road. Just construction equipment and stacks of drainage pipe waiting to be buried beneath land I had owned for more than 40 years. A man wearing a reflective vest noticed me and walked over. "Can I help you?" he asked politely. I pointed toward the trench. "I think you already have." He looked confused. "Are you the homeowner?" "I am." His expression changed immediately. The homeowners association told us everyone had been notified. I looked from him to the trench and back again. "I have not received a letter, an email, or even a phone call. Who authorized this?" Before he could answer, a familiar white SUV rolled into my driveway and stopped beside the excavator. Vanessa Holloway stepped out wearing sunglasses and carrying the same leather portfolio she brought to every HOA meeting. She smiled as though she had arrived to welcome me home. "Daniel," she said, "I was hoping you would be back today so we could explain everything." I had lived in the neighborhood long enough to recognize that tone. It was the voice people used when they expected agreement instead of questions. "You could open my driveway," I said. "That usually comes before the explanation." She ignored the comment and opened her portfolio. The board approved a drainage improvement project. This work benefits the entire community. I looked past her toward the trench. "Then why is it crossing my property?" "Because this is the most efficient route." It was such a simple answer that it almost made me laugh. Efficient for whom? Certainly not for the man who could no longer drive into his own garage. "Did I sign anything?" I asked. "No." "Did the county approve this?" "The board approved it," she replied. I noticed she had answered a different question. I did not ask about the board. Her smile faded slightly. "The homeowners association has authority over common improvements. This driveway is not common property." She closed her portfolio with a quiet snap. "Our engineer determined this alignment was necessary." Again, not an answer. Just another reason why someone else thought they could make decisions about land they did not own. The construction crew had stopped working by then. Every one of them was watching the conversation without saying a word. The supervisor finally stepped forward. "Sir, if there is a problem, we can pause until everyone gets on the same page." Vanessa turned toward him almost immediately. "There is no problem. The project is authorized." Authorized? It was the second time she had used that word without telling me who had actually granted the authority. I looked around one more time. Still no permit posted. Still no county markings. Still nothing connecting this excavation to any public agency. I had spent enough years running a small construction business to know one thing. Legitimate projects usually leave a paper trail long before they leave a trench. Standing there at the edge of the broken concrete my father had helped pour with his own hands, I realized I was about to find out whether this project had won. And if it did not, someone had picked the wrong driveway to dig through. I did not argue with Vanessa. Years of running my own construction business had taught me something valuable. The loudest person at a job site was almost never the one holding the strongest position. Paperwork usually decided those arguments long before anyone raised their voice. I looked at the contractor instead. "How long have you been working here?" He glanced at Vanessa before answering. "We started yesterday morning." I slowly nodded. That meant they had spent nearly 2 full days cutting into my property while I was hundreds of miles away. The timing bothered me almost as much as the trench itself. "When did you know I was out of town?" I asked. Vanessa answered before anyone else could. "That is irrelevant." I turned back toward her. Actually, it is the first question that matters. She folded her arms. The board schedules projects according to contractor availability, not homeowners' vacation plans. It sounded reasonable until I remembered something. Only 4 people knew I would be gone that week. My daughter, my next-door neighbor, Tom, my fishing partner, and the HOA board, because I had emailed them 2 weeks earlier asking them to postpone a landscaping inspection until I returned. I felt an uncomfortable thought settle into the back of my mind. Had they chosen this week because they expected no one would challenge them? I kept that thought to myself. Assumptions were dangerous. Evidence mattered more. Can I see the county permit? I asked. Vanessa gave the same confident smile she always used during HOA meetings. Everything has been handled. That was not my question. She looked toward the contractor again. We have engineering approval. I asked about the county permit. There was a noticeable pause, long enough that even the workers exchanged quick glances with one another. Finally, Vanessa said, our engineering consultant coordinated the necessary documents. Again, she had answered a question I had never asked. I walked over to the excavator and looked inside the trench. Fresh sections of drainage pipe were stacked nearby, but had not yet been installed. The excavation itself stopped only a few feet, short of the center of my driveway. Another day of work would have destroyed the entire entrance. Mike, the contractor's supervisor, joined me. I want you to know, he said quietly. If something is wrong here, we will cooperate. His tone sounded sincere. Did you personally see a county permit? I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck before answering. No. We received the work package from the homeowners association. They told us approvals were complete. Did anyone from the county inspect the site before excavation? Not that I saw. That answer landed harder than I expected. Every legitimate public drainage project I had ever been around involved inspectors appearing sooner rather than later. Someone measured. Someone checked utility markings. Someone signed paperwork. This site had none of that. While Mike returned to his crew, I walked slowly toward my mailbox. Sometimes permit notices are posted where they are visible from the public road. Mine held only advertising flyers and a fishing magazine that had arrived while I was away. No notice. No county paperwork. No construction advisory. Nothing. As I stood there, Tom walked across the street carrying a cup of coffee. He looked embarrassed before he even started talking. Daniel, I figured you already knew. Knew what? Vanessa told everyone the county approved a drainage improvement. She said your driveway was the only practical route. Did anyone actually see county approval? Tom frowned. Now that you mention it, no? We just believed her. That sentence stayed with me. We just believed her. It explained why nobody had called me while I was gone. They assumed the project was legitimate because it sounded official. Authority has a way of discouraging questions. Before leaving, Tom added one more detail. There was a board meeting last month. Vanessa said delaying the project would cost the association thousands of dollars. Did she mention my property? Only that everything had already been cleared. Cleared. Approved. Authorized. Throughout the afternoon, I had heard 3 different words describing the same invisible permission. Yet nobody had produced a single document proving it existed. I drove to a nearby hotel for the night because my garage was inaccessible and construction equipment still blocked most of the driveway. After checking in, I opened my laptop and searched the county's online permit database. I entered my address. No results. I searched my parcel number. Nothing. Then I searched for active drainage permits throughout the subdivision. Several older projects appeared from previous years, each with permit numbers, inspection histories, and approval dates. The project cutting across my driveway was nowhere to be found. I refreshed the page twice, convinced I had entered something incorrectly. The screen never changed. Sitting alone in that hotel room, I realized tomorrow was no longer about arguing with the homeowners association. It was about visiting the one place that could answer every question with certainty. The county either had a permit on file, or it did not. I arrived at the county administration building a few minutes before it opened. I was carrying a folder with my property records, a notebook, and more questions than answers. The woman at the information desk directed me to the Permit and Development office on the 2nd floor. There were only 3 people waiting ahead of me, which gave me just enough time to organize my thoughts. I did not want to sound angry. I wanted to sound precise. When my turn came, I introduced myself and slid a copy of my property survey across the counter. I would like to verify a drainage excavation permit for my address, I said. The clerk smiled politely and asked for the parcel number. She entered it into her computer, waited a few seconds, then frowned slightly. Let me check another database. She searched again using my street address instead. Then the subdivision name. Then active permits issued within the last 60 days. The result never changed. She looked back at me. I am not finding an active permit connected to your property. I kept my voice calm. Could it be filed under the homeowners association instead of my address? That is possible, she replied. Let me search by applicant. She typed for another minute, scanning the screen more carefully this time. Finally, she turned the monitor slightly toward herself and shook her head. I do not see any drainage permit issued to your homeowners association for this location either. I thanked her and explained what had happened while I was away. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making a note on a yellow pad beside her keyboard. When I finished, she asked one question that immediately caught my attention. Has excavation already started? 2 days ago. Her expression changed. Without a visible permit. None that I could find. She stood from her chair. Please wait here for just a moment. A few minutes later, she returned with a man wearing a county identification badge that read Senior Permit Reviewer. He introduced himself as Richard Collins and asked me to repeat the story from the beginning. This time I included every detail I could remember. When I mentioned that the HOA president repeatedly referred to the project as authorized without ever producing a permit number, he wrote that sentence down word for word. Mr. Whitmore, he said after reviewing the computer records himself, I can confirm we have no record of an excavation permit, drainage permit, or right-of-way authorization affecting your parcel. Could an application still be pending? I asked. He searched another screen before answering. If it were pending, we would still see the application. There is nothing pending under your property or the association. That answer eliminated the last reasonable explanation I had been considering. Before leaving, Richard handed me a business card. If work continues before this is clarified, call this number immediately. As I walked back toward my truck, I realized something important. Up to that moment, every piece of evidence I had gathered came from county records. I still had not heard directly from the people who were actually doing the digging. Instead of driving home, I returned to the construction site. The equipment was already running when I arrived. Mike shut down the excavator as soon as he saw me walking over. Any luck? He asked. The county cannot find a permit, I replied. He stared at me for several seconds before quietly saying, That cannot be right. I handed him Richard's business card. You are welcome to call yourself. Mike looked at the card, then toward the trench, and finally back at the other workers. One of the younger crew members, a man named Jason, walked over after overhearing the conversation. Can I say something? He asked. Mike nodded. Jason looked at me. On every county job I have ever worked, an inspector comes out before we dig. We mark utilities, verify plans, and someone signs off before the excavator starts. None of that happened here. Did anyone ask why? I said. Jason hesitated. We were told the HOA had already handled everything with the county. That sentence sounded almost identical to what Mike had told me the day before. It had been repeated so often that everyone simply accepted it as fact. Just then, Vanessa's white SUV turned into my driveway again. She stepped out carrying the same leather portfolio, but this time I noticed something different. Instead of walking confidently toward the trench, she headed straight for Mike. Before she reached him, I spoke first. The county cannot find your permit. She stopped in her tracks for only a fraction of a second before smiling again. That is impossible. They checked every database. She opened her portfolio and removed a full set of engineering drawings, spreading them across the hood of her SUV. These are the approved plans, she said. I leaned closer. They were detailed, professional, stamped by an engineering firm. But one thing immediately stood out. I had seen enough approved construction plans during my years in business to recognize what was missing. There was no county approval stamp anywhere on the drawings. I had seen enough construction drawings during my years in business to know that professional engineering plans and legal authorization were not the same thing. A drawing could explain how something should be built. It could not give anyone permission to build it. I looked across the pages spread over the hood of Vanessa's SUV one more time. Every sheet carried the engineering firm's logo. Every page was neatly labeled. Every measurement looked precise. But the one thing I expected to see, the county approval stamp, was nowhere to be found. Where is the approval page? I asked. Vanessa tapped one of the drawings with her finger, These are the approved plans. Approved by your engineer, I replied. Not by the county. For the first time since I had returned home, she did not answer immediately. She simply gathered the drawings back into her portfolio and said, "Our consultant has all of the supporting documentation." That sentence bothered me more than I expected. Yesterday, it had been the permit. Today, it was the consultant. Every answer pointed towards someone who was not standing there. Before anyone could continue the conversation, Mike quietly told his crew to take an early lunch. Within a minute, the equipment was silent again. Watching them drive away reminded me of something my father used to say whenever we worked on a project together. When the paperwork gets confusing, stop swinging the hammer. I had not thought about those words in years. My father believed almost every expensive mistake could be traced back to someone rushing ahead before asking enough questions. He had learned that lesson the hard way as a carpenter. He made sure I learned it before I was old enough to drive. I walked into my garage through the side entrance and stood there for a moment. The smell of old lumber, motor oil, and cut grass had not changed in decades. Against the back wall sat a gray metal cabinet that had belonged to my father. Most people would have thrown it away years ago. I never could. Inside were dozens of carefully labeled folders held together with rubber bands that had long since lost their stretch. Dad kept everything. Receipts, surveys, warranty cards, utility maps, even handwritten notes explaining why he chose one building material over another. As a teenager, I thought it was excessive. Standing there now, I realized it was one of the smartest habits he ever taught me. I found the folder labeled Driveway, 1987. Inside were photographs of my father and me standing beside wooden forms before the concrete trucks arrived. I was 22 years old, smiling because I thought the hardest part of the job was already behind us. In another picture, my mother was holding sandwiches for the entire crew while my father checked the grade with a string line. Looking at those faded photographs, I could almost hear him laughing because I had accidentally stepped into wet concrete and left a boot print near the edge. We had repaired it before the surface cured, but he teased me about that mistake for years. Beneath the photographs sat the original invoices for the concrete, gravel base, reinforcing steel, and equipment rental. There was also the recorded property survey prepared before construction began. My father had highlighted one sentence in yellow decades earlier. All improvements shall remain entirely within the owner's property boundaries. At the time, I doubt he imagined that sentence would matter nearly 40 years later. Tucked into the back of the folder was something I had completely forgotten existed. It was one sheet of lined notebook paper written in my father's careful handwriting. At the top, he had simply written, "For whoever owns this place next." The note was not about concrete or drainage. It was about responsibility. He wrote that property lasts longer than people, which is why owners should protect both the land and the records proving what belongs to it. One sentence stopped me cold. The day someone tells you paperwork does not matter is the day you should ask to see it. I folded the note carefully and slipped it back into its sleeve. Outside, I could hear construction trucks returning from lunch, but they no longer sounded as intimidating as they had the day before. My frustration had changed into something else. Confidence. Not because I knew I was right, but because every document my father had saved pointed in exactly the same direction. By the time I locked the cabinet and carried the entire folder back into the house, I realized I was no longer trying to prove the HOA had made a mistake. I was trying to discover how many people already knew it before the first shovel ever touched my driveway. I barely slept that night. It was not because I was worried about the driveway anymore. It was because one sentence from my father's note refused to leave my mind. The day someone tells you paperwork does not matter is the day you should ask to see it. Until then, I had been asking whether the homeowners association had a permit. By sunrise, I realized I had been asking the wrong question. The better question was who had known there was no permit before the first piece of concrete was cut. At 7 o'clock the next morning, the contractor's trucks rolled back into my driveway. The excavator climbed off its trailer, but something felt different. The crew was moving slower than before. They were looking at me almost as often as they looked at the equipment. Mike walked over carrying a clipboard. "Morning, Daniel." "Morning." He hesitated before speaking again. "Before we start, I called our office." That immediately caught my attention, and I asked them to send me every document we received from the homeowners association. He opened the clipboard and handed me a photocopy of the work authorization. At the top was the HOA letterhead. Below it were the engineering drawings, the construction schedule, and the board's approval to begin work. I flipped through every page. Where is the county permit? Mike gave a slow shake of his head. There isn't one. Did your office ask for it? We assumed it had already been verified. It was an honest answer, but it also confirmed something important. The contractor had trusted the HOA. The HOA expected everyone else to trust them. Somewhere between those two assumptions, nobody had actually checked. Before either of us could continue, Vanessa's SUV appeared at the end of the driveway. She stepped out carrying the same leather portfolio, walking with the confidence of someone expecting another ordinary workday. Why has construction not resumed? She asked before saying good morning to anyone. Mike answered first. We still need the county permit. You have our authorization. I need the county's. Vanessa looked surprised, almost offended. We discussed this yesterday. We discussed it, Mike replied calmly. We did not resolve it. For a brief moment, nobody spoke. Then Vanessa opened her portfolio again and removed a stack of printed emails. Our engineering consultant coordinated everything, she said. These emails prove the project has been under review for months. She handed the pages to Mike. He read them silently before passing them to me. At first glance, they looked convincing. Conversations about drainage, design revisions, cost estimates, scheduling. But something felt incomplete. I read every page again, more slowly this time. There were emails between the engineering firm and the HOA board. Emails discussing proposed routes. Emails requesting revisions to the plans. Emails estimating construction costs. What I did not see was a single message from the county approving anything. Then one line near the bottom of the final page caught my attention. It was written by the engineering consultant only 6 days before excavation began. Construction should not begin until all required county approvals have been obtained. I read the sentence again to make sure I had not misunderstood it. Then I looked up at Vanessa. Did you read this before work started? She answered carefully. The consultant was being overly cautious. Mike reached for the email and read the sentence himself. His expression changed immediately. That doesn't sound optional. Vanessa folded her arms. We believed the approvals would be issued. Were they? I asked. She did not answer. Mike looked at me, then back at the email, then toward the silent construction crew. Finally, he turned to his foreman. Nobody unloads another piece of equipment. The workers stopped where they stood. One man who had already begun placing traffic cones quietly picked them back up. Another climbed out of the excavator without touching the controls. The entire job site came to a standstill because of a single sentence buried near the bottom of an email. I took out Richard Collins's business card and called the number he had given me the day before. He answered after the second ring. I explained exactly what we had found, reading the consultant's warning word for word. Richard interrupted only once. Do you still have those emails? Yes. Do not let them leave the property. I am sending a county permit inspector immediately. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and looked. Across the driveway. 24 hours earlier, this had looked like an ordinary construction project. Now it looked like something entirely different. The question was no longer whether someone had forgotten to file paperwork. It was whether they had decided to keep digging after being warned not to. The county inspector arrived 28 minutes later in a white pickup with the Department of Building and Development seal across both doors. He parked beside the excavator, climbed out carrying a tablet and a thick inspection binder, and walked straight toward me. Daniel Whitmore? He asked. I nodded and handed him the printed emails before saying anything else. These are the messages the HOA provided this morning. He thanked me, slipped them into a clear evidence sleeve, and read every page without speaking. When he reached the consultant's final email, he stopped. His eyes stayed on that sentence for several seconds before he looked up. Who provided these? The HOA president. He gave a short nod, then walked directly toward Vanessa. Good morning. My name is Laura Benson with County Permit Compliance. Vanessa forced a polite smile. I believe there has been some misunderstanding. Laura ignored the comment. Did your board receive these emails before excavation began? Vanessa hesitated just long enough for everyone to notice. Yes. Laura held up the final page. Did your board receive this warning before construction started? Vanessa looked at the paper but did not answer immediately. Yes. The entire job site became silent. Even the workers loading tools onto the trailer stopped moving. Laura read the sentence aloud in a calm, steady voice. Construction should not begin until all required county approvals have been obtained. She lowered the paper. Was construction started anyway? Vanessa looked toward the contractor instead of the inspector. We believed approval was only a formality. Laura typed something into her tablet. Belief is not the same as authorization. That single sentence seemed to drain the confidence from the entire conversation. She then turned to Mike. When did your company receive these emails? Yesterday afternoon. He answered. And when did you suspend work? Immediately after reading that warning. Laura nodded. Thank you. There was no criticism in her voice. She simply recorded the timeline exactly as it happened. Next, she asked Vanessa for every document related to the project. Vanessa handed over her leather portfolio. Laura carefully removed each folder one at a time. Engineering drawings, meeting minutes, contractor agreement, budget approvals, correspondence with the consultant. She placed everything across the hood of her truck and began comparing dates. It took nearly 15 minutes before she suddenly stopped turning pages. She looked back at one email, then at the meeting minutes, then returned to the email again. Ms. Holloway, she said quietly, your board meeting approving construction was held on May 14th? Yes. This email from your engineering consultant advising you not to begin construction until county approval was obtained is dated May 9th. Vanessa nodded. Yes. Laura looked down once more. So the board voted to proceed 5 days after receiving written notice that construction should not begin. Nobody said a word. Mike slowly removed his work gloves and tucked them into his back pocket. One of the crew members quietly whispered, You've got to be kidding me. Laura was not finished. She continued reviewing the correspondence until another detail caught her attention. There appears to be another attachment referenced here. She held up one of the emails. At the bottom it read, See attached county review comments.pdf. Laura looked at Vanessa. Where is this attachment? Vanessa blinked. I do not know. Was it included with the documents you provided? No. Laura looked directly at her. Did you read it? Another long pause followed. Finally, Vanessa answered, almost in a whisper. I do not remember. Laura made another note before calling the engineering consultant using the phone number listed on the drawings. She introduced herself, identified the project, and asked one question. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. When she ended the call, she looked toward everyone gathered around the driveway. The consultant has confirmed that the missing attachment contains the county's preliminary review comments. Mike frowned. Preliminary? Laura nodded. According to the consultant, those comments identified multiple deficiencies that had to be corrected before any permit application could even be approved. Nobody moved. Laura continued. The consultant also confirmed that those deficiencies were never corrected. I watched Vanessa's face lose every trace of confidence she had shown since the day I came home. For the first time, nobody needed to ask whether a permit existed. The question had changed completely. The county now had reason to believe the HOA had been warned in writing that the project was not ready, received comments explaining why, and chose to start digging anyway. Laura closed her binder, looked at Vanessa, and spoke in the same calm voice she had used all morning. Ms. Holloway, I am formally requesting the missing attachment and all communications related to this project. If they are not provided voluntarily, the county has other ways to obtain them. Laura left the property with copies of every document she had collected, but before driving away, she turned back toward me. Mr. Whitmore, she said, please do not repair anything yet. We need the site to remain exactly as it is until the investigation is complete. I agreed without hesitation. At that point, the broken driveway had become more than damaged concrete. It was evidence. The construction equipment disappeared before sunset. For the first time in 3 days, my property was quiet again. Yet the silence felt different. It no longer felt like I was waiting for another argument with the HOA. It felt like someone else had finally taken over the questions. 2 mornings later, my phone rang, just after 8. The caller ID showed county permit compliance. Laura's voice sounded exactly as calm as before. We located the attachment. I sat up a little straighter. The one from the consultant. Yes. She paused. You were right to preserve everything. Less than an hour later, I was sitting across from her in a county conference room. A thick investigation file rested on the table between us. She opened it, without saying a word, and slid one document across the table. It was the missing attachment, county review comments. Every page carried the county logo and a tracking number. Across the top of the first page, in bold letters, were the words, "Not approved for construction." Beneath that heading was a list of required corrections. Revise drainage calculations. Submit revised engineering drawings. Obtain written easement from affected property owner. Complete utility review. Receive final county approval before construction begins. My eye stopped on the third item. Obtain written easement from affected property owner. Laura noticed exactly where I was looking. "There is something else," she said. She opened another section of the file and produced an email chain the engineering consultant had voluntarily provided after speaking with the county. Most of the messages were the same ones I had already seen. Then I reached an email I had never read before. It was dated 4 days before construction began. The consultant had written directly to Vanessa. "Because Mr. Whitmore has not signed the required easement documents, construction across his driveway cannot legally proceed at this time." I looked at the signature block to make sure it was authentic. It matched every previous email. The timestamp matched the county's records. There was no question it was genuine. "Did the board receive this?" I asked quietly. Laura nodded once. According to the consultant's server records, it was delivered successfully. She turned another page, and there was a reply. My stomach tightened before I even read it. Vanessa had responded less than 20 minutes later. Her message was only one sentence long. "We cannot delay this project any longer. We will handle the homeowner afterward." I read the sentence twice, then a third time. During the entire investigation, I had tried to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Maybe someone misunderstood the rules. Maybe paperwork had been delayed. Maybe assumptions had replaced verification. That single email erased every reasonable explanation I had been holding on to. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It showed that the missing easement had been identified before construction began, and someone had chosen to move forward anyway. Laura closed the folder. "The county did not find evidence of an accidental oversight," she said. "We found evidence that required conditions were identified before construction and that work proceeded without satisfying them." That distinction changed everything. Before leaving the conference room, she handed me a copy of the investigative findings and explained that the county had scheduled a formal compliance hearing for the following week. Representatives from the engineering firm, the contractor, and the homeowners association had all been directed to attend. As I reached the parking lot, Mike called me. "I just got the county notice," he said. "We're supposed to testify." "So did I." He was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "Daniel, there is something I never mentioned." "What is it?" "The morning we started digging, one of my foremen asked Vanessa whether you had signed an easement. She told us not to worry about it because, in her words, the homeowner will complain no matter what, so it is better if we finish before he gets back." I closed my eyes for a second. That explained the timing of everything. The fishing trip, the rush to start, the confidence. They had not simply hoped I would be away. They had counted on it. The county investigation had begun with a missing permit. It had uncovered a missing easement. Now it had revealed something even more damaging. Someone had made the decision to treat my absence as an opportunity. The county compliance hearing was held 9 days later in a conference room that looked more like an ordinary classroom than a courtroom. There were no television cameras, no raised benches, and no dramatic speeches. Just long tables, stacks of binders, and people who understood that every statement made that morning would become part of the official record. I arrived 15 minutes early and took a seat near the back. I wanted to listen more than I wanted to speak. Mike was already there with the owner of his construction company. The engineering consultant arrived carrying 2 thick binders and immediately sat on the opposite side of the room. Vanessa walked in last with 2 HOA board members and the association's attorney. She still carried the same leather portfolio, but it looked much thinner than it had a week earlier. Laura Benson opened the hearing by presenting the investigation timeline. She did not offer opinions. She simply placed one document after another into the record. The engineering drawings, the county review comments, the consultant's warning email, the contractor's work authorization, the photographs of my damaged driveway. Every piece fit together like part of a puzzle that had already been solved before anyone entered the room. Then she displayed the email that had changed everything. "Because Mr. Whitmore has not signed the required easement documents, construction across his driveway cannot legally proceed at this time." She paused just long enough for everyone in the room to read it before displaying Vanessa's reply beneath it. "We cannot delay this project any longer. We will handle the homeowner afterward. Nobody spoke. Even the association's attorney remained completely still. Laura then called the engineering consultant to testify. He confirmed under questioning that his firm had never authorized construction. He explained that the plans provided to the HOA were preliminary and could not legally be used for excavation until the county's review comments had been addressed and a permit had been issued. Did your firm ever tell the homeowners association they were free to begin work? Laura asked. No, he answered immediately. In fact, we repeatedly instructed them not to proceed. She handed him another printed email. Is this your message? Yes. Did you ever receive a response stating the deficiencies had been corrected? No. The room remained quiet. One by one, the assumptions that had protected the HOA's decisions disappeared under documented evidence. Next, Mike testified. He explained that his company had relied on the HOA's representation that approvals had already been completed. He admitted they should have verified the permit independently, but also confirmed that work stopped the moment they learned the county had no record of authorization. Laura thanked him and turned toward Vanessa. Ms. Holloway, she said, did you receive the county review comments before construction began? Vanessa answered softly. Yes. Did you know an easement from Mr. Whitmore was required? Yes. Did you have one? No. Did you authorize excavation anyway? There was a pause that seemed much longer than it actually was. Finally, she lowered her eyes and answered with a single word. Yes. You could almost feel the room exhale. It was not because anyone enjoyed hearing the admission. It was because every unanswered question from the previous week suddenly had an answer. The association's attorney quietly asked for a short recess. When the hearing resumed 20 minutes later, something had changed. Instead of defending the project, the attorney informed the county that the HOA accepted responsibility for the unauthorized excavation and wished to cooperate fully with corrective actions. Laura acknowledged the statement before presenting her final recommendation. The county would maintain the stop work order, require complete restoration of my property under proper permits, assess administrative penalties where authorized, and refer the investigation's findings to the HOA board for internal governance review. She then closed her binder and said something I doubt anyone in the room expected. This investigation was never about a driveway. It was about whether documented legal requirements could be replaced by assumptions. They cannot. As people slowly gathered their papers, I noticed several homeowners who had attended the hearing quietly walk past Vanessa without saying a word. A week earlier, many of them had defended her decisions because they trusted her confidence. Now they had seen the emails with their own eyes. Confidence had been replaced by evidence, and evidence was impossible to argue with. When I stepped outside into the afternoon sun, my phone buzzed with a message from Tom. It contained only one sentence. The HOA just called an emergency board meeting for tonight. The emergency board meeting started at 7 o'clock that evening, and by 6:30, every chair inside the clubhouse was already occupied. Homeowners stood along the walls, filled the hallway outside the meeting room, and gathered near the open doors hoping to hear what would happen next. I had attended dozens of HOA meetings over the years. I had never seen anything close to this. The atmosphere was not angry. It was quiet. People had come looking for answers, not another argument. I took a seat in the last row beside Tom. I have never seen this many people, he whispered. Neither have I replied. At precisely 7, the association's attorney stood before the room instead of Vanessa. That alone told everyone something had changed. He thanked the residents for attending and explained that the county compliance hearing had concluded earlier that day. Then, without embellishment, he summarized the findings. The board had authorized excavation before obtaining the required county approvals. Construction had begun without a recorded easement from the affected property owner. Written warnings from the engineering consultant had not been followed. Every statement was supported by documents already entered into the county's official record. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody needed to. The facts spoke clearly enough on their own. When he finished, he invited Vanessa to address the homeowners. She stood slowly, holding the same leather portfolio that had accompanied her through every confrontation since I returned from my fishing trip. This time she did not open it. I owe this community an apology, she began. I believed we were acting in the neighborhood's best interest. I convinced myself that completing the drainage project quickly would solve a long-standing problem. In doing that, I accepted assumptions where the law required proof. That decision was mine. Her voice remained steady, but it carried none of the confidence that had once dismissed every question I asked. Mr. Whitmore deserved my respect before construction began, not after the investigation ended. So did every homeowner who trusted this board to follow the law. She sat down without saying another word. There was no applause, no shouting, just silence. Then one of the longest-serving residents stood from the front row. This neighborhood elected a board to protect property rights, he said, not ignore them. Several heads nodded. Another homeowner rose. How do we know this will never happen again? The attorney answered by introducing a package of governance reforms. Every future project affecting private property would require written legal review before any contract was signed. County permit numbers would be presented during open board meetings before construction could begin. Any work involving private land would require written consent from the owner unless a recorded legal right already existed. Independent verification would replace assumptions. The board voted on each policy one at a time. Every measure passed unanimously. Then came the final item on the agenda. Vanessa stood once more. Effective immediately, she said quietly, I am resigning as president of the Homeowners Association. She placed the leather portfolio on the table in front of the remaining directors and stepped away without looking back. No one celebrated. There was nothing satisfying about watching someone lose a position they had once cared about. But there was something deeply reassuring about seeing accountability arrive through process instead of anger. A week later, the association's insurance carrier approved funding to restore my driveway completely. This time, before a single truck entered my property, I received copies of every permit, every inspection schedule, every engineering approval, and every signed authorization. The county inspector visited before excavation resumed. Utility markings were verified. Temporary access was installed so I could reach my garage every evening. The work took 6 days. When it was finished, the new concrete blended almost perfectly with the original driveway my father and I had poured together all those years ago. The only visible reminder was the old photograph I framed in my garage showing the two of us standing beside the fresh concrete in 1987. I hung it above the gray filing cabinet where he had stored every survey, receipt, and handwritten note. Sometimes neighbors stop by and ask why I keep so many old records. I usually smile before opening the cabinet. Because paper lasts longer than memory, I tell them. And when someone eventually asks where your rights begin, it is much easier to hand them a document than an opinion. Looking back, the Homeowners Association never really lost because the county stepped in. They lost the moment they believed confidence could replace documentation. My father understood something I only fully appreciated after all of this was over. Property is protected long before anyone pours concrete. It is protected by the quiet stack of papers that proves what belongs to you, by the patience to ask one more question when everyone else assumes the answer, and by the simple decision never to confuse authority with permission. In the end, the strongest thing I owned was never my driveway. It was the evidence that proved it was mine all along.